Today we're having a teaching chair.
It's like Groundhog's Day, the three of us starting all over again this morning. Good morning to those who are joining either on live stream or here in Zoom. If you're here in Zoom, please, if it feels good for you, to put your cameras on so Christina has some lovely faces to look at. And welcome to those from live stream. I can't see you, but I imagine you're looking stunning wherever in the world you are. Welcome. And just before we're getting started, I would really love to hear from anyone, if you want to put it in the chat, what your favorite poses so far have been and what poses you're looking forward to. So what have your favorite poses been, or what poses are you looking forward to? So either in live stream, you can put in the chat and Steve will cross it over to me. All right. Hello, welcome everybody. Welcome to today's Thursday? I'm not even sure what day today is. Today's Thursday. And we have another special lineup. It feels a little bit, like I said, Groundhog's Day before we start the recording, because it's the dynamic trio again starting you off this morning. I'm Jamie, and I'll be hosting you this morning along with Steve, our tech host, and of course, our lovely facilitator, Christina. Just to get us really fully started and prepared and ready. If you're here in the Zoom with us, it would be great to see your lovely faces. That also helps Christina, have some feedback and see what's going on and happening for you. And today's session is all about vulnerability pose. So discovering your innocent side or lack thereof. So we'll find out what you have in store, what your body has to say about vulnerability. So welcome to those on Zoom and also on the live stream. And so those who are in the Zoom room with us have bought products with us or been in past trainings with us, and that's why we get to see you here in Zoom. And for those on the live stream, I'm sorry we can't see you. However, we can receive all of your feedback in the chat and all of the things that you want to share. So please share freely, and Steve will make sure that Christina or I get to see those. And so just to, again, set you up, for those of you that have been here for a few of these sessions, you know the drill. The session lasts an hour, and Christina will take us through how to use vulnerability, not only in your everyday personal life or what that might look like or how it's showing up, but she'll also take you through how you can use vulnerability in a coaching session or coaching scenarios. And then how you might be able to very skillfully put that into a yoga class or a group setting. So we get all that packed into this wonderful hour. And of course, I have to mention that we have a free spot on the EYP teacher training up for grabs. So you have to be in it to win it. And I know I'm seeing some familiar faces here in the Zoom. You guys have heard me say, the gals have heard me say this quite a few times. So if you want a chance at winning that, you have to go over to our Facebook group, share it, and tag a friend to enter. And Steve will put that in the chat for anyone who is interested in doing that. And before we get into all of the juicy stuff of vulnerability, and let's face it, vulnerability is juicy, Steve is going to play for us a little video about EYP and how you can use that in a coaching context. And it features none other than me. So go ahead, Steve, hit play for us so we can have a little peek at that. What the EYP course for coaches has to offer you is a way to shift things from getting stuck in the head and getting into the body. These very simple forms can be done in normal clothing, in any setting, anywhere, and you can then begin to look at the patterns that might be keeping your clients stuck. As a coach, I use this mostly with my clients with intimacy and relationship and communication, and as soon as I get them to move from the cerebral part of the conversation and getting them down and into their body.
See yourself as you see other people, because I have a very critical eye at the moment.
So when you sign up, there's plenty of support available to you. We have a private Facebook group that you are welcome to join. We have monthly Q&A calls, so you get a lot of ideas of how other people are using the same things.
Rocking that in.
Thank you, Steve. That's such emotive music at the end, I find. So all of the trainings, whether personal or for coaches or teachers, come with the full masterclass recordings that we're doing over this fun masterclass week. And Steve will put into the chat if you want to see what kind of specials we have going on. So without further ado, I would like to introduce to you our wonderful facilitator today, and that is Christina. She is currently based in Thailand. So, and by the way, if anyone wants to put in on their names where you're from, that's also helpful to Christina to see who's in the room. Okay, back to Christina. She is an experienced embodiment coach and somatic educator. Christina helps to guide people towards authentic expression and empowered relationships. So she works a lot in the intimacy and relationship realm. Christina and I both share that, which is fantastic, especially for vulnerability. So if anyone is wanting to explore that vulnerability when it comes to relationships, then you're in store for something beautiful today. She's an Aikido black belt, so that basically means don't mess with her. She's turned into a passionate dancer, and she has a background in social sciences. So with that dynamic, complete wrap up of wonderful things, I give you over to Christina for your session today.
Thank you, Jamie. Welcome everyone who's with me here in the room and also watching the live stream right now. Today I'll be sharing vulnerability pose with you and going a little bit more into various aspects of vulnerability. And my aim is to also give you a felt sense, like an embodied experience of the difference of, for instance, vulnerability and other qualities that we might kind of confuse vulnerability with. So if, for instance, vulnerability and manipulation have some sort of link for you, then maybe we'll look at that later and discover where we can maybe disconnect the two. All right, before we start, I'm very curious to hear though, what does vulnerability mean to you? First ideas that pop up, feel free to share that in the stream or here in the chat. I'm very curious. What's your understanding of vulnerability? Being vulnerable. Sharing even when it's hard. Yeah, absolutely. Showing up when it's difficult. Yes, equally. An unsafe place to be. It can feel like that. Absolutely. And per definition, being vulnerable is exposing yourself to a sort of threat or making yourself easier to attack, possibly. That's one of the definitions. Participating without control, allowing yourself to be seen. Yeah, there's definitely an element in being seen. And we also have a pose that's called, it's taking space, but it's also being seen. So potentially we'll throw that in today a little bit as well. Okay, great. So it looks like we're somewhat on the same track with what or how we understand vulnerability. So I want to introduce you to the pose that we've created to represent that and give you a full body somatic experience. So if you were willing, you can either do this on the floor. This is the common way of doing it. So if you have floor space available to you or a mat or whatever, that would be great. Otherwise, you can also adapt it to a chair, and I'll show you that after I'm showing the one on the floor. So if you have a bit of floor space, just adjust the camera. Vulnerability is a very asymmetrical sort of pose. So if you want to bring your knees together and angle them to the side and really create this sort of almost like a fishtail, like a mermaid fishtail. Anybody familiar with the statue of the Little Mermaid? Yeah. And then your hands, place them on your knees, both on top of each other. And then tilt your head a bit to the side. And maybe try looking up a little bit. How does that feel? It's not a super athletic pose, unless you have some like stiffness maybe in your hip, and I'll be coming to the chair pose in a second as well, the alternative. But it's not necessarily physically demanding, but maybe you find sort of some resistance coming up in your system, or you're like, oh, I kind of want to get out of this, and it doesn't need to be physical reason. Sense into that. Notice your breath as well. Maybe this pose is very familiar to you. Or maybe not in this entire way of sitting, but in a similar way of sitting. There are obviously like slightly less expressive ways of sitting in a similar fashion. Or maybe you're like, oh, this is actually quite nice. Feel like a lady, something like that. I don't know what comes up for you. Feel into that. And then we're going to come out of it. And notice as well what happens when you come out of that, maybe into a more centered position. Is there a moment of like, this feels so much better? Or, I actually quite like that. That might be an indication of what your relationship to vulnerability is as well. Let's try the other side. So angling the knees to the other side. One side always feels different than the other, so it's good to do both, especially for the yoga teachers here, always do both sides. Now look that you angle the head as well to the other side, kind of like a zigzaggy, asymmetrical shape. And look up. Is there any tension? How's your breath right now? How are you breathing? Any thoughts coming up? Any judgments potentially about this? Or possibly there's even a thought of, oh, I could use a little bit more of this. Where? Where in your life could you do with a little bit more of this? Even if it's just a tiny pinch, like adding a tiny bit of spice. What if I told you that we're going to sit like this now for another half hour while I talk you through all the different elements of this pose and vulnerability as such? What is your reaction? Are you like, oh shit, no way, let me get out of here? Or is it more like, yeah, I wouldn't mind. It's like maybe I would relax my arms a little bit, but otherwise I'm quite comfy. All right, we're not. So come out of it and come back. And I'm curious to hear your first insights or your impression. Anything come up? Please share with me what you noticed in your own body maybe. So the general questions I tend to ask in EYP is this familiar? Is this a pose? And it might look a little bit different. And while you share with me, for those who are sitting on a chair, I'll quickly show you the variation as well, which is pretty much the same, just a level higher. So if you're on a chair, same thing of, where's the height of the camera? Angling your feet to one side, the head remains the same. It's that sort of ladylike, feet are together, angled to one side. Hands are on the knees. And there's a diagonal in your body, like a turn. And the head is tilted to the side. If you want to test that while you're sitting in a chair, please feel free to do that as well to get another flavor of that. Okay, I'm going to have a look at the comments. Hard for someone with PTSD. Okay. Yeah, EYP as such can bring up a bunch of stuff, just to note that again. And please also to stress that, take care of yourself and only do as much as feels good for you and join in as much as feels good for you. I offer all of these poses up for exploration, but it's all an invitation. So if you're like, today, actually, I feel a little already, maybe going deeper into vulnerability is not the right time for you. But if you feel curious, just make sure you come out of it early enough. Okay. All right. First, I felt like a Princess Diana when she was first in public notice. I'm curious what you mean with that. Is that a little bit of stiffness maybe even? Or like a ladylike sense? Or feels awkward? Yeah, I totally had that same response. I was like, ooh, this is awkward. Not so comfy. Left hip is very stiff. There are ways that if this is physically demanding, you can pop a pillow, for instance, under your hip to give it a little bit more of a raise, if it is your hips that are blocking it. The main thing is to keep it an asymmetrical sort of shape. Not familiar. Feels dependent, as listening to someone who has power over me. Yeah, right. There's maybe like this, it feels a bit weak coming in. That was certainly my first interpretation of this pose. Had to consciously breathe into it and surrender. Oh, I remember my resistance coming up to this pose when I first did it. I was like, get me the fuck out of here. Cringe. Yeah, it feels tender, not comfy, not sustainable for me. Yeah. And here again, I would ask the question, is it because it's physically not comfy or not sustainable to stay in it? Or is it because there's an emotional resistance coming up? Because if it physically is not straining, then it might point to something else. And then I'd ask you, how is your relationship to vulnerability in your life as such? Okay, body is stiff, but pretty much liked it and would have liked to be longer there. That is the longing that we often speak to. And then get precise. Where exactly? Is it I want to show more vulnerability, bring that into my relationship? Or is it actually I'd like to bring that into my friendships? Or with that one particular friend when we're having a conversation? Or try to really be specific in these moments. I love it. It was such a relief to be in this pose where it wasn't familiar. Yeah, absolutely. Normally in it, like it being like or yay, it shows a preference, but it's really the longing or the familiarity that we look at. Because it's like, it can be like, yay, this feels good because it's familiar, or because it's longed for, or it could be yuck because it's too familiar, or it's like, yeah, I don't need that, like, got too much of that. I feel like a little girl. Yes. Nice. I'll get back to that in a little while, because the subtitle was as well kind of discovering or dropping into the innocence. And vulnerability has a lot to do with innocence, at least the way we're framing it here. Thank you for your participation. Great. It irritates me. Yeah. Right. It looks very feminine. Yeah. Confused signals. I'll get to that when I talk about coaching a little bit more as well. Yeah. It doesn't feel safe. All right. So first of all, I'll show you why potentially that doesn't feel safe from a physical standpoint. And me as a trained martial artist, I struggled so much with this pose, especially because of the asymmetry of it. So if you want to try that out with me, if you come into that sitting again. So this will be the way me as a martial artist, I was used to sit. Like the knees even maybe wider than that, solid, stable ground, upright, centered, and equal distribution. It was sort of like a right-left is like always equal and frontal facing, right? How does that feel? Are you stable, solid, strong? Maybe close your knees and notice what that does. This could be a version of inward as well. We've talked about privacy or inward pose. It already might shift something for you. Then bring the knees out again. This could equally be an expression of the outward, taking space pose. Notice that difference. And then we're going to build up to the vulnerability pose by closing the knees And if you want to assist yourself by putting a hand down, bringing your bum to one side and coming back into it, compare it to that other pose, angling the head, bringing the hands to one side. This is way less stable. If somebody was to push me here, I'd probably fall over to one side unless I use my hand to support myself. Whereas being here, I could probably balance and get it out. But here, I'm turning, I'm angling everything. I'm giving up my stability in my body. I'm showing my neck, which is, especially if you look at the animal kingdom, and we're part of them, is like here, I'm showing my vulnerable spot. This is where it could be leading to a lethal strike or a bite or whatever it is. But this is one of the most vulnerable parts of our bodies. Yeah. So even based on that, we can come out of that. The physical shape of it might seem way less strong or way less stable. And that, especially if you're trained to be a certain way in your physical expression, might give you a little bit of a, I'm not used to that, this feels uncomfortable. And beyond that as well, vulnerability is exposing. It's exposing that part. It's exposing the parts of us that normally we might want to close off and hide and not show, per se. How was that comparison for you? Is there anything you noticed in that little comparison between like sitting really stable? And once again, you could equally do that on a chair. You could try the sitting really wide-legged and stable, both feet on the ground. Bring them in a bit, but still both feet on the ground and stable, solid, upright. Or going into the angled, where I don't actually have any support with my feet, really. A little bit more close position preferred, having my own space, feels calm. Yeah, that's when we look at especially the inward outward. So vulnerability is also yin pose. Yin poses as such, if we talk about feminine, masculine principles, not to confuse them with male or female, they're the more receptive, the more, there's a quality of inward rather than outward expression. There's also less like a force behind it or like an activity. It's less of an activity in it. It's more like a receiving. Yeah. So I believe that in our culture, part of the problem is really that we've been told from when we were really, really little, and that applies even more to guys or people who've grown up in a male body, that weakness is not acceptable. You got to be strong. You got to push through. You got to make it emotional. It's unacceptable. Don't show what's really going on. If it's weakness, don't even show, if you're not adhering to the perfect image. And like, if you don't have a good day, just pretend you are. And all that is like, there's a certain idea of how we need to show up in the world. And this is rather the sort of like, here I am, and I'm going to go for it. Then going into that, there's a bit of soft, maybe a sweetness, and also childlike quality. So that little girl that's maybe not allowed to be there. And the curiosity that a child brings. Okay. So I want to go dive a little bit into that distinction. And this is something that might be one way of looking at vulnerability and using this vulnerability pose as well in a coaching context. So as I said earlier, there is a potential for understanding this pose or vulnerability as such in various different ways. And maybe some of you had that response, and I saw it from the comments a little bit as well, that vulnerability is weak. And that we just addressed. So in some way, we could look at that and maybe find ways to make it more stable, but there's also nothing wrong with it not being a super solid and stable pose. It doesn't need to be. But the other one that I want to address is vulnerability and manipulation. And that ties very much into, so last night we had a session on sensuality. And I'll just quickly show you the pose for that. It can be either here or here. The principle that is very similar here is the asymmetry. It's the angled, it's the standing on one foot, not having the solidity in it. So there's something that they have in common. But what happens a lot of the times is they get mixed together. And where I see that happen a lot is advertisement. So vulnerability, if you want to go into the pose again with me, angle so you can see. Vulnerability has this element of the little girl. It's a sweetness. And allow yourself to enter this pose with an idea of sweetness and curiosity. Like that gaze up there. Or maybe you want to blink your eyelids as well. Soften a little bit, soften the jaw, soften your chest a little bit. And look at the world, look at that corner up there with curiosity. And that's the quality that vulnerability can have. I'm here, I'm showing up as I am, there's no need to protect anything, and I'm looking at the world with curiosity, I'm encountering everything around me with that curious look. And I'm not in a fight or protective mode, I'm actually really like, here I'm showing that I'm vulnerable. Which is very different to, if we contrast that now, to seduction. But that's where it often gets confused. So if you want to just alter this a little bit, maybe raise your shoulders a bit. And have you seen these adverts with pouty mouth? Yeah? Go a bit into the pouty mouth. Yeah. Yeah, that has a resonance in my body where I go, ugh. There's like and maybe that shoulder. Yeah, you can lift that a bit. And like, look over there, whatever you can imagine. I was like, ooh, I want that. Yeah, that's a bit of a different type, a different take on this. So let that go, shake that off, that variation. Especially if you're like, oh yeah, this is actually how I understand vulnerability. It's like, it's that sort of way of like, oh, I'm weak, help me. I need your help. Show me how this is done. Which in my opinion is a weaponization and abuse of vulnerability, of that innocence, of a beautiful kind of softness, which is weaker, maybe, but not weak. But if it gets abused and used like that, there's a distortion. And so to have that differentiation between, yes, I'm sitting like this, but I'm actually relaxed. And I'm curious about the world. And I'm bringing the innocence to it. As opposed to, I want something from the world. Yeah? Okay, let's come out of that. Any insights about this? Anything you noticed? I feel a strong opening. Yeah, strong opening of the heart in the actual vulnerability pose. Yeah, if you approach it with curiosity and that sense of like an innocent take, untainted, then it can be quite opening. Yeah. Yeah, the other one is very seductive, for sure. Yeah. Confusing me at the moment as the feeling seems so different from the one side to the other. But like right and left differ so much? Oh yeah. Yeah, sometimes that can happen. I would suggest a curious inquiry into that and seeing if there might be even just something in the physical shape that you do, which might be like a shoulder raise, that tilts it more towards something else. And then to follow your own body and what feels more like that innocent, curious. Very familiar. Beautiful, this link to sensuality and advertising. So true. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, unfortunately, we've been bombarded with images where vulnerability, especially if women are depicted, has been used. And this conflation of the sexy woman, like a grown woman, and the little girl, that innocent girl that wants protection, happens. And I'm really like, it triggers me. But to make that distinction in your own system might help to find access to that vulnerability again, to find access to that inner, vulnerable, innocent, young girl, young child. And it doesn't matter if you're in the body of a male or female human being. It's like to look at that. Because for me, for the longest time, I had this strong rejection. It wasn't only the physical shape that made me be like, I'm so used to stability, ground, like asymmetry, no fucking way. It was also that contortion of like like this is manipulation, this is weak, this is everything I reject in this world. I want to show up in my power, and then suddenly being like, yeah, that's why I can't be vulnerable. I can't possibly show myself because that's all of these things that I don't want. And once I managed to kind of, through distinction coaching, basically, like making that distinction, it was like, oh, wow. And that was for me such a big moment in my life because it allowed me to finally access that innocent quality of my feminine as well, the softest side of myself, the more curious part, the playfulness even. It all linked in with that. But since I threw it all out with, the baby with the bathwater, for a long time I was like, no, gotta be strong, gotta be masculine, gotta, figure out the world in that one way. And that created some sort of barrier as well. And this is where it becomes relevant in relationships. So the longest time, maybe putting up that barrier to be safe or to not be fully seen, definitely not at my weak moments, definitely not when I felt emotional or not at my best, was putting up a barrier between me and other people, especially between me and maybe my intimate partners, close relationships. Does anybody have a similar experience, or am I on my own here? Yeah. Yeah. And that points to like, for me, vulnerability is the foundation for like true intimacy as well. Once you allow yourself to embrace all these parts and embrace especially the parts that might be a bit like, don't feel so safe, need that protection. And once you actually embrace them, accept them, and then even show up with them, it gives the opposite, the person in front of you, a very different ground or a very different canvas, a different, way of relating with that as well. Yeah, I get it now, the difference between curiosity and the manipulative way, experiencing release rather than receiving in this pose. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, curiosity is absolutely one critical point to distinguish the kind of manipulative me and the more innocent. There's even a curiosity pose we have here in the UIP system, which we'll be doing as well. Any questions up until this point? For those of you who don't have questions, I invite you to take a moment to close your eyes, if that feels all right. And gift yourself a moment of presence with yourself, which means guiding your awareness to your sensations. First of all, everything from the temperature, maybe a slight breeze you can feel on the skin, the surface you're sitting on, feeling of the clothes on the surface of your body touching, and also any tension you feel in your body. Any movement, even the slightest little movement. And then also pay attention to the emotional flavor that's with you right now. What do you notice? If you were to give it a color, not a name, or an actual flavor. Recently, we talked about how we can also describe it in terms of the weather. What's your emotional weather like right now? And then what are the thoughts that ruminate through your head? And in all of that, if you were now asked to share everything you've noticed with another person, what would you edit? What would you not share? What would you take out and be like, nah, I talk about that, but not about that. This is okay, but not that. Is there room or space for you to actually share all of it? In all honesty, fully, because this is your experience right now. And maybe you have a no in you, and that's okay too. Because fully sharing our entire experience on all these different levels, including the parts that we don't like others to see, is a very vulnerable thing to do. But maybe you're willing to at least make the first step on that path and show up more fully. Reveal these parts that you normally hide. And maybe only to the person closest to you. And sometimes that's even just yourself. Be like, yeah, this is what I feel. And maybe this is not hard for you at all. Then I encourage you to dig deeper and go even further. There's always more to find. There's always more editing we do. What's the most vulnerable thing you could share right now with someone? You don't have to right now. Instead, take another deep breath. Thank yourself for being willing to take a look. And then when you're ready, open your eyes again. And we're going to continue. Yeah, I'm just reading a few more comments. How much practice? I was going to get to that. So vulnerability pose, as I mentioned, I really struggled with this. Like when I did the UIP teacher training, I struggled with vulnerability the most. And it was kind of at a cross way for me of embarking onto an entire journey of integrating some parts that I'd rejected harshly in myself, including my femininity, including vulnerability, sensuality, sexuality, all that, because of all the messages I've received as a younger girl or young woman. And I went to like embracing the warrior, gotta get it done, gotta protect myself, and all these other parts. And then I did a lot of work, including this pose. I sometimes just sat in it And what I give as a homework in coaching sessions, for instance, is often there's a week-long break between sessions to sit with that pose for a minute a day. A minute a day. Sit in it a minute a day. That's one way to do it very structured. There's another way. Every time you sit down on the floor somewhere, see if you, instead of your habitual, maybe cross-legged way, or like having white legs on the chair, sit in a more vulnerable way. And we could spin this even further. How could you walk more vulnerably? Instead of strong, fast strides ahead, can you bring more curiosity, maybe a bit of playfulness, and a bit more openness, and thereby maybe a bit more vulnerability in your walking? How would you do that? These are all ways you can practice this in particular. And then beyond that, there are ways of picking up a practice. A lot of communication practices like authentic relating, for instance, allow this, or circling, or all these where you actually get to reveal yourself more to other people and be witnessed in it. And the witnessing is one thing how it can also be included in yoga. Oftentimes we do yoga just for ourselves, and like a yoga class is just me on my mat, and like I do my thing and then I leave the class, and it's all like, instead, what about doing pair work, partner work? In acro yoga they do, but not like that. But actually take a pose, take a posture, and have somebody witness you. And do that in a tandem, do that in a pair. That'd be one thing. And that could already feel quite vulnerable. And that's one way to step into it maybe a little bit more. Let me see the, yeah. And then there's another way of including it into your daily life, which is micro postures. In EYP, we love to give micro postures as well, which are sort of the minimal, the smallest way you could do this pose without looking weird, without going like, hold on, darling, I got to sit down like this, and now we can talk, and now I can actually share what's really going on for me. It'd be like if you find yourself in conversation going into a habit of, all right, I'm not sharing anything, in that square sort of manner, try what a head tilt can do. That's one way. Bringing a little bit of softness here, but especially that head tilt. And the quality of listening and curiosity. I have that naturally in me, sort of head tilt. It's a very yin type of feature. You can almost notice it in a group of people when you look around sometimes. It's like some people are always like, all right, here I am. And some people are like, okay. And these people sometimes look a bit more friendly or kind or nice. Or yeah, there's a softness in that and an exposing of the neck again. All right, Jamie, is there anything you would like to add of how you've used this in your coaching practice or in teaching yoga? We're so lucky that we have multiple teachers in the room. So,
thank you, Christina. When it comes to teaching a class, especially in yoga, because it's so similar to, kneeling, being on your knees, it's really easy. One of the variations that I like to play with in a class here, let me just retilt that. I'm not matching today either, so you can deal with that all, is to come from this place of being that sturdy. And then what is it like to come off to one side? And then coming back up through to center, and then coming off to the other, and playing with this, moving from one to the other. And what's it like? So right now, as I was just doing it, I wasn't using any support. So I'm being vulnerable on my own. What's it like to have support? So I'm using my hands to help me. So it's not always easy to be vulnerable, but what's it like if I were being supported in my vulnerability? What if I was, if I had a friend or a partner or even an internal resource where I felt support? And I think it's Wendy Palmer who uses the idea of having a posse. And, you know, who's this posse that always has your back? You know, they can be real, imagined, dead or alive people, and or someone that was a mentor or you really looked up to. So for me, I could think of my grandmother. My grandmother always, even though she's not alive anymore, I can think of her supporting me in my vulnerability because she was a strong woman. So that's one way that you could play with a transition in a yoga class. You know, it's also for anyone in the class who doesn't want to necessarily dive into the vulnerability side of it. It can be, you can play that off as playing in your hips, because that's a really good way of getting into your hips, because a lot of men don't have access to that movement. They don't have access, not because they don't want to, but they can't get into it. And so, you know, using your hands, that can help. So that's one way in a yoga class. And as far as coaching, you know, it's always for me a great inquiry, depending on what's showing up for the individual or the couple. You know, what's showing up, where are they being, as you said, Christina, I think this is a great way, that square, where are they being square? And where can they use that asymmetric? And it's kind of, without getting into a conversation about it, without getting into the head about it, let's see what's happening. What does your body say about how you're showing up in vulnerability? So that would be an inquiry.
Thank you so much, Jamie.
You're welcome.
There was also a question about what do you do when students get triggered? It's important to create a frame up front if you do this type of work, and we'll dive really deeply into that when, like within the course, you get all the different ways of setting the frame, setting the container, and all that. And also, there's an element of self-responsibility that I would give at the beginning as well. Like really, like I said earlier as well, only go as far as you really feel like it's good for you today. Like look after yourself, self-care. But then there's room and space to possibly chat to people after. It's the gentle step by step, like starting with a little bit. And if you notice, this brings up a lot of stuff, get out of the pose, get to a more solid pose, and then take a breath. And maybe that's enough for that one session. And if it's within a coaching context, you could obviously then build it up over various sessions. If it's within a teaching framework, just encourage people to really stop early enough to, like, if it's just a little uncomfortable, it's fine. But if it's actually bringing stuff up, maybe taking a rest and then slowly, gradually moving forward. Yeah, calibration, exactly. So before we wrap up, I just want to also share how this has really been a great meter for me as well. So when I first did this pose, it was like, oh my God, get me out of here. Then I did a lot of work on like this distinction between manipulation, weakness, and vulnerability as such. I engaged in a lot of other practices that brought out these sides in me more, and I gave it more space in my life. And then the funny result was that 3 years later or so, or even a year later, I joined one of these EYP teacher trainings again, just out of curiosity. And I had no issue with the pose at all. I was like, And then another year later, I actually find myself sitting like this a lot, like sideways legs. And the more you practice something, the more it becomes part of the natural habitual embodiment. It's always what we say. It's like we are what we do, and especially how we do it, but we become what we practice. So it's all what we practice. Unless there are other questions, I think I'll leave it at this and just allow you to maybe drop in to yourself and remember all that we did today, and maybe ask yourself, what is the one thing, or maybe there are more, that you take away from today? And this could be from a coaching standpoint, this could be for yourself, just your own self-development. This could be in a teaching context. Like, what is the thing you take away for yourself from this vulnerability post-exploration we did today?
Christina, I would also just add, for those exploring vulnerability, the way that EYP works really wonderfully, and I think you're probably witness to this as well, is that pairing it with another EYP or another one or two forms to help you feel stronger in it. So just like yesterday when you were doing no, you could use yes to help you understand your no. And just like the other day when I did stand, we used authority, so which of the EYP forms can you help use to feed your vulnerability? And that's going to be different. I'm not going to offer any suggestions because that's going to be different for each person here. But there are, if there are 26 forms, vulnerability being one, you've got a choice of 25 other EYP forms to support you into becoming either a friend with your vulnerability or integrating it, or whatever it is you're trying to do, whatever choice you're trying to make for yourself. So that's a nice little way to begin using the EYP together.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jamie. It's definitely helped me. Like, I had to look at sensuality as well when I was embracing vulnerability again. All the asymmetrical, more yin poses, actually, to be honest.
And for some, it might be authority. It might be authority in vulnerability. That would, especially for the women, for the men, it might be different, one of the other complementary poses, but for women, it might be authority and vulnerability. What's that play? What's that dynamic? I've just seen you have another question in the Zoom chat. It says, so how should we sit? In which pose practice?
If you want to practice vulnerability, I would say angular, like with both legs on one side. Either if you're on the floor, folded to one side as we practiced, or on the chair as well. It's taking out a little bit of that square stability. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. There's one other thing I wanted to mention, but now it slipped my mind again.
That's okay. You'll have a chance to come back to it. So I'm going to share a few things with you now. I'm going to take over from Christina, and she's going to come back after I've finished, and she's going to share with you her top tip around vulnerability or the use of vulnerability. So we'll come back to Christina for a little morsel of juiciness. So thank you, Christina, for walking us through vulnerability and giving us a new reframe around what that is, especially with the manipulation and how society and culture has shaped this, because really vulnerability gets shaped through us more so anywhere else in culture and society around what that's supposed to look like in a human body. What does that mean? So thank you for that reframe. And again, anyone either live stream or here in the Zoom room with us, please feel free into the chat. We'd love to know your biggest takeaway, your biggest insight, what hit you the hardest with this. We'd love to see that in the chat, and coming back to that in just a moment. So again, for everyone that is here, just a reminder, please feel free to enter our competition to win the EYP teacher training course, where you get to learn all of these things. You get to learn all these things and more, and it's trauma informed, and there's such group learning that comes with EYP. None of us do this on our own. We get to bounce off of each other and really be with each other in this training, and also beyond. It's a great community. So Steve will put up how you can enter to win into the chat. And basically just go to the Facebook post, you share it, you tag a friend to enter. So it's pretty easy to do. It's not too complicated. And remembering that, of course, change is not always easy, but working with the body is the most effective way to facilitate that change. At least that's where we're coming from in this EYP way of integrating and being with the body and really understanding the choices that we have available to us. So if you can think of a friend who really needs this, I'm sure we all have a friend or a family member that we could share this with. So please share this event. It would mean a lot to us. We're putting this on for free for everybody here, and we want to spread the word as much as possible because it's such value. It is such value when we as a collective get into our bodies, it's this ability to get into our bodies and really know what's true for us, that we can begin taking bigger, bolder, brighter actions in the world. And who doesn't want to be in a world where we're doing that? I know that's where I want to be. So please share away. Steve will again put a link into the chat for how you can do that. And Steve is going to also share with you in the chat, some of the specials that we have going for the teacher trainings. We have a few different options. We have EYP for the everyday. So anyone who wants to be a part of that. We have EYP training for specifically coaches. And then we also have the EYP for yoga teachers. And they each offer something a little bit different. You still get the 26 forms, you get those poses. The yoga one, that one takes you a bit deeper, because you're going to learn deeper in the sense of you get to learn more about what's happening from an anatomical point of view. So it's safe in a teaching context. Not that any of this really is super athletic or dangerous in any way, but it gives you a little bit more, because you kind of need that languaging when you're in teaching a yoga class. You also get, the trauma-informed piece. You learn all of the micro poses. So each of these forms have micro poses. And if you're a coach, that's the juicy part, because you can begin helping your clients when they're out in the everyday doing whatever it is. You can feed them these micro poses to really help them land the change or show up how they're trying to show up. So you get that all in the coaching and also into the EYP for teachers. And it looks like we've got some specials happening here. I see Steve flicking through all these various ones. So remember, we have online training, and they're beautifully filmed, and you get a wide variety of voices in them. It's not just one teacher kind of drumming away. And that's, again, the beauty of the EYP community, is that all of our voices are valid. We all created this together. So again, he's just on the screen scrolling through all the various bits and pieces that you get, how you can do centering. And centering is a huge piece, whether you're doing this in every day, whether you're doing this as a coach, or whether you're doing it in a yoga class, the ability to center and then do what's hard or difficult. So that's what Steve has shown us here. And then what's next? Oh, also, anyone who buys any of the packages, of course, you get the whole EYP Masterclass series thrown in there for free, and you get to access all of the wonderful teachers, international teachers that we've had over this last week. And then what's happening later today? Let me tell you. So Steve, before you flick onto the screen, let me read my screen first. Later today at lunchtime, by the way, I'm saying these all in UK times. At lunchtime today at 12, we have Death Pose with Vidyadasa. However, there's a warning on this one. That one can be a little bit triggering. So please proceed with caution if you're in a nice, stable place for that one. And then tonight at 6 o'clock UK time, we have Rest Pose. I'll be hosting that. And it'll be lovely Jane taking us through rest. I can't think of anyone better to take us through rest. And then at 10 p.m. UK time, we have Openness Pose with the lovely Tess, who is English but residing in California. And then at 2 a.m. UK time, we have Joker Pose with Melissa. So that's what we have going for the rest of today. We still also have all of Friday. And do we have stuff on Saturday too, Steve? Just give me a thumbs up. Do we have courses? I know I'm teaching something on Saturday in the evening. So we do have things happening for the next couple days. So stay tuned. And also before I hand back to Christina, I would love to know in the chat, just for myself, because I'm curious. I haven't seen all of the sessions, and this is for the live stream peeps too. What's been your favorite post so far? What's been your favorite post so far? And what pose are you still yet to look forward to? So if you want to just put that in the chat, I want to know, especially what your favorite pose has been so far, because maybe I want to go check it out and see the different spin on it, because that's the great thing with all these different teachers, is that everyone has something very different to offer. All right, Christina, so I'm going to hand back to you. And so if you want to just sort of first maybe sum up your highlight for personal coaching and class, and then your top tip for us, that would be great.
Thank you, Jamie. So because you've just announced all the schedule, I'm doing one more session. I'm hosting a few more, but I'm doing pushing pose tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Pushing. It's more like getting shit done, or less. Doing less of that could be one option. And the top tip for developing vulnerability, I think maybe twofold. Curiosity, to really look at everything through this curious lens, which eradicates judgment a little bit, and especially the gaze inwards. To approach that with the degree of, oh, what's there? Oh, look at that. Oh, what other part is there? And to really approach everything from curiosity and welcoming. So welcoming is the other one. To fully welcome your entire experience and start there. Yeah. And then practice, practice, practice. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Christina. And thank you everyone who has joined us. Thank you, Steve, as well, for all of your wonderful tech hosting. And thanks everyone on the live stream. Even though we haven't been able to see you, it's been great to have your participation and all your chat and interaction. We look forward to having more of that in future sessions. And Steve, if you wouldn't mind doing a unmute so we can just say thank you all together, that would be great.